Hey guys, tonight we're stepping behind the cloister walls into a world of stone silence, sandalwood prayer, and, believe it or not, some of the most elite gardening in medieval Europe. You're standing in the quiet courtyard of a convent, and the air smells faintly of thyme and last night's firewood. Frost clings to the edges of the stone path, but already a few green shoots are pressing through the soil like sleepy children poking their heads out of warm blankets. You tug your cloak tighter. It's early spring, maybe March, but the sun is lazy, hiding behind clouds the same gray as old parchment. One of the sisters, her habit neatly patched at the elbows, walks slowly past you with a woven basket on her hip. Inside, bundled twine, a dull pair of shears, and what looks like a handwritten chart that's probably in Latin. She doesn't speak. She just nods. Welcome to the garden. Not just any garden, mind you. This one is both holy ground and science lab, confessional and hospital wing. And it smells better than any place you've been today. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere far off, Tallahassee or Tokyo, drop your city and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where these sleepy little journeys take us. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You kneel beside a raised bed outlined with smooth river stones. The earth here is dark and spongy, clearly worked by hands that know what they're doing. Overhead, doves coo softly from their wooden alcoves, probably gossiping about your poor posture. That's fine. You're more interested in the tiny green shoots coming up between furrows. Some are labeled on thin wooden markers: Salvia rosmarinus, Melissa officinalis, sage, rosemary, lemon balm. The holy trinity of medieval herbal calm. Here's a funny thing. Medieval nuns weren't just allowed to garden. In many cases, they were expected to. It wasn't simply about food. It was about healing, about control, about salvation through sore knuckles and sunburned noses. And let's be real, it gave them a break from chanting. You pause to rub a leaf between your fingers. It releases a citrusy, almost minty aroma. Lemon balm, believed to soothe melancholy, ease digestion, and chase away certain impolite spirits. Did it work? Well, historians still argue whether the effects were medicinal, placebo, or just the result of not living next to the pigsty anymore. Near the cloister archway, an older sister is hunching over a tool that looks like a wooden rake, but with teeth too fine to till soil. She's combing dried herbs, a blend of sage and rue, into neat piles like a librarian sorting returned books. The convent bell tolls once, echoing like a dropped spoon in an empty hall. Nobody flinches. You follow a narrow gravel path, worn down by generations of slippered feet. Moss grows freely here, tolerated, as long as it doesn't choke the calendula. Some stones are etched with faint crosses, others with the initials of long-gone sisters who once tended this very same patch. Their quiet legacy is written in basil and beetroot. A curious smell wafts your way, sharp, musky, and weirdly floral. A nun nearby is grinding something in a stone mortar. She glances up, then back down. The pestle moves in slow, sacred circles. She's humming a tune under her breath, an old Marian hymn, repurposed perhaps for Mullen. You step aside as a novice passes, carrying a clay pot heavy with marjoram. It's been potted with bits of crushed eggshell and moss and tied with red string to protect the roots. Red string, always red. Not for luck, mind you, but to ward off rot and possibly witches. Historians still debate whether the string's color had a religious significance or was just a practical solution to mold. You find a bench tucked beneath an ancient pear tree, its bare limbs clawing at the sky like an arthritic prayer. This is the resting corner, a spot for contemplation, or for pretending you're contemplating while your back gets a break. You sit. The bench creaks, and a robin hops nearby, unimpressed. Farther off, behind a crumbling garden wall, is the compost pile. You'll get there eventually. Don't rush. For now, breathe in the scent of holy thyme and last season's sage stems. Listen to the faint rustle of robes, the click of wooden tools, the scratch of quill on parchment from an open window somewhere above. The air has that peculiar medieval mix, damp stone, dried mint, and just a hint of hay. You wonder if they ever got bored, these cloistered women with their daily herb rotations and sacred silences. But then again, you've barely been here 5 minutes, and already you're starting to relax. Maybe they knew something we've forgotten. The bells toll again. It's not time for Mass. It's time to tend to the fever-few patch. One of the older sisters beckons you silently, offering a pair of shears with a handle smoothed from decades of use. You take them, your fingers brushing hers. Warm, dry, work-worn. You begin to snip the outer stalks, careful not to damage the crowns. The plant's daisy-like flowers bob in the wind like sleepy heads. It was once thought to cure everything from migraines to melancholy. Some said it kept lunacy at bay. Others just liked the way it smelled when crushed between pages of psalms. One thing's for sure. These nuns didn't garden because they were bored. They gardened because the world was dangerous. Medicine was mostly guesswork, and growing your own remedies was an act of both defiance and grace. You lean back against the stone wall and let the scent of crushed herbs fill your nose. A beetle crawls past your boot. The robin is still judging you. That's fine. You're not here to impress him. You're here to rest, to wander, to learn why these quiet women built the best herb gardens in Europe, one whispered psalm and wormwood leaf at a time. You stay close to the elder nun who handed you the shears, following the slow sway of her robe as she glides down another narrow path. The gravel crunches gently beneath your boots, a rhythm both sleepy and precise. She doesn't speak. None of them do, not here, not during morning labor. The silence isn't just an atmosphere, it's a rule. And in this convent, silence is golden, and occasionally compostable. The vow of silence taken by many medieval nuns wasn't always total. There were exceptions for emergencies, confessions, and occasionally yelling at a goat that wouldn't leave the lettuce beds. But during set times of the day, and especially in sacred spaces like the garden, words were considered distractions from the divine. So instead, gestures ruled the day. You pass 2 younger sisters kneeling beside a row of early lettuces. One taps her wrist, pointing at the sky. The other nods and pulls a small linen cloth over the baby greens. You realize they're using a kind of sign language, an informal, unrecorded code of everyday gestures passed down from nun to nun, like secret recipes. And you nod too. You're catching on. In the silence, your senses go hyper-attentive. You notice the faint crackle of frost, still clinging to the outer edges of the leaves, the faint thrum of bees waking in the nearby orchard, and the creak of wicker baskets settling beside stone. The garden, while quiet, is never still. Everything here is in slow, sacred motion. You pass an herb bed edged with wooden planks, and something catches your eye. A bundle of dried dill hanging from a hook nailed into the stone wall. Below it, a carved message in Latin, in silentio, medicina, in silence, medicine. There's a theory, still debated by historians, that convents served as proto-hospitals in regions where doctors were scarce or skeptical of peasant illness. And the herb garden. It was the dispensary. Not all convents had the same rules, of course. Some were strict Benedictines who barely allowed eye contact. Others were more relaxed, encouraging gardening as a spiritual exercise as much as a practical one. You bend down beside a plot of violets. One of the nuns has arranged them in tidy clumps, ringed by gravel and small seashells. The shells seem oddly coastal for this landlocked region. Maybe they were brought by pilgrims. Maybe a sister once went on a rare visit to a seaside abbey and brought back a pocket full of memories. Or maybe, just maybe, violets grow better when they feel fancy. As you reach out to touch the petals, the nun beside you holds up a finger, then carefully presses her own palm over the bloom as if to say, "Listen first, then touch." So you listen. The violets hum in their own way, surrounded by the low hum of bees and the distant echo of morning mass beginning inside the chapel. A bell chimes faintly from within. The sound doesn't break the silence. It deepens it. You stand and continue walking, brushing past rosemary bushes, now warmed slightly by the rising sun. Their scent, piney and sharp, jolts your senses just enough to keep you from drifting too far into the dream this place is becoming. There's an odd little moment ahead. One of the sisters has taken to sculpting the hedges into shapes. Not animals or saints, mind you, but herbs themselves. You chuckle softly as you pass a hedge shaped vaguely like a carrot. Another one looks suspiciously like an upset stomach. She's a botanical comedian in a habit. Humor, after all, is holy too. At the center of the garden, a circular plot is divided into 8 segments, each labeled in Latin with what appears to be a malady. Dolor capitis, mala digestio, pestis animes, headaches, indigestion, afflictions of the soul. This is the diagnosis garden, where herbs were planted not alphabetically but by complaint. Your guide, silent as ever, hands you a small scroll. You unroll it to find a diagram of the garden you're standing in, with symbols marking specific herbs and their uses. One section is heavily underlined. It's the row of lemon verbena, marked with a note. Good for worry, better with prayer. You smile. Sounds about right. As you walk the circuit, you imagine being one of these women, waking before sunrise, praying in darkness, then stepping barefoot into a frosty patch of sage to begin your day's work. You wouldn't have spoken, but maybe you would have hummed. Quietly, just enough for the plants to know you were there. Historians still debate whether the silent labor of nuns was empowering or restrictive. Were they quietly shaping their world through knowledge and discipline? Or were they simply obeying in exchange for small pockets of autonomy? Maybe both. Maybe neither. Maybe it depends on the weather. You kneel to examine a few sprigs of tarragon, tied with string and marked with a tiny pebble. That means they're due for harvesting soon. Or it means Sister Agnes forgot to remove the marker after yesterday's sun blessing. Who knows? What you do know is that your own breathing has slowed. The garden's rhythm has replaced your own. The silence isn't empty. It's full of footsteps, glances, fragrant breezes, and a kind of low-frequency faith that things will keep growing if you just keep tending. You hear the chapel bell ring again, a shorter tone this time. Morning labor is over. The sisters begin drifting back toward the stone cloister, baskets full, fingers stained green. One of them gives you a warm look, something halfway between gratitude and curiosity. You rise and brush the soil from your knees, but you're not done yet. You've only just begun to see what these gardens meant. Not just plots of land, but living libraries, silent therapists, and wordless songs to God. And your feet. They turn toward the next patch. Your path curves behind the chapel now, away from the well-tended beds and toward a more tangled corner of the garden. Here, the order loosens. Gravel gives way to moss. Labeled stakes disappear. The soil darkens. This is where the wild things grow, what the sisters call the edge. You crouch beside a patch of nettle. Most would give it a wide berth. Itchy, aggressive, the enemy of bare ankles everywhere. But here, it's prized. Nettles make soup, tea, salves, even cloth if you're brave and blister-proof. A nun in heavy linen gloves trims it with reverence, dropping the leaves into a basket already lined with fig leaves. As you watch her work, she offers you a tiny smile, then lifts the edge of her habit just enough to show a sprig of mugwort tucked into her sandal strap. You nod. Apparently, it wards off fatigue, or blisters, or boredom. Historians still debate whether mugwort was used as a spiritual ward, a medicinal patch, or simply a trendy fashion statement in some particularly progressive convents. Beyond the nettles is a corner that looks different, wilder. It's overgrown with oxalis and henbane, rimmed with bits of broken pottery and smooth river stones. You notice a small wooden carving tucked between the roots of a twisted tree. It's a crude figure, a kneeling woman holding a plant. No eyes. No face, just soil-smeared hands. This is where the weeds live. Only, they're not just weeds here. They're sacred guests. You find chickweed nestled against the base of the wall, wood sorrel curling under an overturned clay pot, and something that might be belladonna, its leaves casting a sinister shimmer in the morning light. You don't touch that one. A nearby nun, older, with a stiff gait and a habit fraying at the edges, leans on a wooden staff as she points to the plants. She whispers something. A name, maybe? Or a warning? You catch the word sacrata, sacred. You remember that for later. You join her by a small bench nestled between two rosemary shrubs. As you sit, she picks up a nearby trowel and gestures to a plant you hadn't noticed, its leaves silvery and soft, its flowers tiny bluebells. Lungwort, used in everything from cough medicine to poultices for aching limbs, named for its resemblance to human lungs because medieval medicine loved a good metaphor. If it looked like a body part, it must heal it, right? You chuckle softly. So did they. You take a moment to watch as bees stumble through the nearby blooms like overworked monks, their tiny bodies dusted in pollen. The elder nun watches too. No words pass between you, but you can feel something shared, like the two of you are watching a choir perform in a language nobody needs to translate. Suddenly she leans forward, pulls a small root from the soil and hands it to you. It's knobbly, wrinkled, and smells faintly of celery and regret. She raises her eyebrows. Ah, you've been initiated. This is wild parsnip. Or maybe wild carrot. Or possibly an ancient form of turnip, no longer in any modern cookbook. Medieval root vegetables were shapeshifters. And sometimes poison. Historians still argue whether some of these roots were intentionally cultivated for healing, accidentally bred for pain, or simply misidentified by a sister with poor eyesight and too much faith. Either way, you thank her with a silent nod. As you tuck the root into your satchel, a bell chimes faintly in the distance, just a single tone, like a sigh from a winded bronze throat. It signals the end of private labor time. Soon the sisters will return indoors to warm broth, sung prayer, and the daily task of hand-copying texts by candlelight. You rise to leave the wilder patch, but not before noticing something strange. A neat little circle of stones, with one white feather placed at its center. You tilt your head. It's clearly intentional. Ritual, marker, bird nest that never happened. You want to ask, but you also don't. Some things in gardens are better left unsaid. That's part of their charm. As you walk back toward the central beds, your sandals crunch lightly on the gravel, and the garden slowly reshapes itself around you. Straight rows, labeled markers, evenly spaced basil plants, like disciplined green soldiers. But you know now that the convent garden isn't just neat geometry and order. It's wild magic at the edges. It's sacred weeds growing beside psalms. It's a silent nun who hands you a root without explanation, trusting that you'll either eat it or plant it. And if you choose wrong, well, maybe you'll just sleep really, really well. At the far end of the row, another sister is bent over a planting box, carefully sorting seeds into tiny parchment envelopes. She looks up and gestures for you to join her. You do. Together, you press rows of chamomile seeds into warm soil. She hums, softly, barely louder than the breeze. It's a melody without words, but your fingers move in time with it. And for a moment, it feels like you've been here forever. You spend a little longer with the chamomile, pressing the seeds just beneath the surface, then brushing a fine layer of soil over them with the side of your hand. The nun beside you keeps humming, tuneless maybe, or just too old to recognize. The notes fall in time with the wind chimes near the orchard wall. A second later you realize they're not chimes at all, but dried rosemary bundles rattling gently in the breeze. Scented music, very on brand. She stands and gestures again, this time toward a long, narrow bed with a delicate wooden arch above it. The wood's been painted a faded blue, and little sun-bleached scraps of ribbon dangle from it, dancing lazily in the air. Beneath it, rows of herbs with names you almost recognize. St. John's wort, angelica, feverfew. You pause. This section feels different. Not wild like the last patch, but not entirely tame either. It's arranged with reverence. These are the plants that, according to medieval belief, didn't just heal the body, they did battle for the soul. The nun taps her chest, then points at the plants. You understand. These were the herbs you used when medicine failed, when someone was sick with something you couldn't name, or acting in a way you didn't understand. These were for the afflictions of spirit, of mind, of whatever couldn't be bled or bandaged. You crouch beside a stalk of angelica, its thick stems sturdy and fragrant, like celery dipped in honey. It was once believed to ward off plague, literally nicknamed the root of the Holy Ghost. Some said it was named after an angel who revealed its powers in a dream. Others said it simply smelled nice enough to cover up less pleasant illnesses. Historians still argue whether these spiritual uses were rooted in real chemical properties, or simply hope wrapped in ritual. But here, in the hush of the garden, surrounded by stone and sun and rosemary music, it honestly doesn't matter. You move to the next patch, feverfew, white petals like tiny parasols clustered in messy joy. Today, we know it can sometimes help migraines. Back then, it was also used to calm hysteria, whatever that meant at the time. Spoiler, it often meant woman having emotions while poor. You pluck a petal and let it flutter from your palm. The breeze takes it. At the far edge of this bed is something stranger, a plant with soft velvety leaves and no flowers yet. You reach out, and the nun gently stops your hand. She mimes holding a bowl and sipping. Ah! A tea herb, probably wormwood. Wormwood tea was the medieval version of drinking fire. Bitter, bracing, and a favorite among those who wanted to purge the system. Of parasites, yes, but also perhaps of guilt, of dreams, of whatever heaviness the cloistered life sometimes carried. Some thought it invited visions, others indigestion. The nun hands you a small cup, warm and gently steaming. It's already brewed, she nods. You take a sip. And wow, the bitterness slaps you gently, like a grandmother correcting your posture. It tastes of roots and secrets, of under-earth things, and the edge of sleep. Your throat feels cleaner, your spine straighter. You're not sure if it's medicinal or just extremely persuasive. The nun chuckles, not loudly, but enough to remind you that humor lives here too, even in silence. Maybe especially. Nearby, another sister is walking slowly along the garden wall, muttering under her breath. She's reciting something, not scripture. It's a list You catch words like mallow, yarrow, and cudweed, a herbal inventory. She keeps it memorized, updating as she goes. No paper, just memory and dirt under her nails. You rise to follow her path. The wall here is old, crumbled in places, patched in others with moss and ivy. Between the stones, tiny sprigs of self-heal poke out, their purple flowers barely blooming. You run your fingers along them. The petals are so soft, they feel like forgetting. You glance over your shoulder and realize the garden is even bigger than you thought. Hidden pockets and narrow passages snake off in all directions, each filled with a different purpose. One for medicine, one for food, one for dye plants. And this one for something that lives in between all of that, a kind of plant chapel. You step beneath the archway again and pass back toward the central path. Ahead, you see another nun lifting a watering jug made from carved clay. The handle's been smoothed by decades of use. She tips it gently over a row of marigolds, sun-colored and stubborn. Marigolds were believed to keep evil away, or at least flies, which, depending on your worldview, might be the same thing. You join her, taking a second jug. It's heavier than it looks. Together, you water the rose in silence, moving with an ease that feels ancient. As the last drops spill from the spout, the bell chimes again. Midday. You brush your hands on your robe, now flecked with dirt, and look around. You've barely scratched the surface of this place, and the nuns, they nod in your direction. It's time to learn about the dirt itself. The sun has risen higher now, casting long bars of light across the convent wall. Shadows sharpen along the garden paths, stretching beside you like quiet companions. A soft breeze rustles the leaves, and somewhere in the distance, a dove coos like it's trying to stay awake after lunch. You follow a nun carrying a spade and a wooden bucket toward a darker corner of the grounds, behind a half-cracked gate where steam seems to rise from the earth itself. The smell hits you first, sharp, earthy, vaguely sour, like wet hay and ancient cheese. It's not unpleasant, just assertive. The nun smiles unfazed and gestures toward a large, slow-moving pile of compost. You're at the compost heap, the garden's digestive system, its smelliest saint. And this is where things get interesting. The pile is layered. Straw, leaves, old herb stems, kitchen scraps, even bits of parchment and sheep wool. It looks chaotic, but there's structure here. At least, according to Sister Beatrix, who appears with a long stick and begins poking with a precision that borders on sacred. She mutters something you think might be a joke. It sounds suspiciously like, St. Lawrence didn't suffer half this heat. You chuckle, and she grants you a small smirk. Progress. Composting in medieval convents wasn't just about waste management. It was a science, a philosophy, a low-stakes theological debate, because everyone had opinions. Cow dung or horse dung, ash or eggshells, weekly turnings or daily. Historians still argue whether composting practices were standardized or entirely left to the quirks of local abbesses with strong feelings about chicken manure. Sister Beatrix clearly belongs to the daily turning camp. She rolls up her sleeves, revealing surprisingly muscled arms, and begins demonstrating how to fork the layers so oxygen can feed the hidden life below. You take a turn. It's warm, really warm. Steam curls upward as your fork breaks through the top crust. The pile writhes slightly with life. Worms, beetles. Possibly one ancient judgmental toad. As you work, Beatrix explains, in a voice so low it barely counts as breaking the silence, that they track the compost temperature by touch and by the behavior of the sparrows. If the birds stop hopping near it, it's too hot, she says. If they sleep on it, you've done well. You blink. That's not in any modern gardening manual, but you accept it with a nod because honestly, who's arguing with the toad? You learn that different composts were made for different beds. Acidic blends for lavender and thyme, milder mixes for spinach and chamomile. Some sisters even tucked relics, small crosses, feathers from the chapel doves, drops of blessed water, into the deepest layers, believing that even rot deserved a little sanctity. It's quiet work, repetitive, and strangely comforting. Every turn of the fork releases a different scent. Apple peel, marigold stem, damp clay. You lose track of time. Your body warms from the effort. Your breath slows. There's an old superstition, Beatrix whispers, that the compost heap absorbs sins along with scraps. That what you bury here, failures, harsh words, spoiled thoughts, turns to nourishment for the next season. Not official church doctrine, but quietly popular among the more poetic sisters. You wonder what you've buried lately, and what might grow from it. Eventually the heap is settled again, its steam rising like incense. Beatrix claps her hands once, satisfied. The birds approve. One lands near your foot and pecks at something invisible. You bow slightly in return. It feels polite. Leaving the compost pile, you follow a narrow trench path lined with flat stones. Each one bears a scratched symbol, some crosses, some moons, one that looks suspiciously like a snail. You ask Beatrix about them, and she shrugs. Markers, she says, for moon gardens. Or maybe just boredom carvings. We're not always pious, you know. She leads you to a small, fenced-off circle where nothing seems to grow, just dirt. Smooth, dark, untouched. No weeds, no tools, not even a bird feather. She folds her hands and whispers, "This is resting soil." It's allowed to sleep. You look again. It really does seem peaceful, like it's dreaming under the surface. Waiting. Soil rest was a common medieval practice, especially in convent gardens, not just for crop rotation, but out of respect. Soil, after all, was alive, and even the most obedient servant needed a nap. You crouch down, pressing your palm flat to the ground. It's cool, damp, still breathing. And while you're there, Beatrix slips something into your free hand, a handful of crushed eggshell and fennel seeds. For blessing, she says, and digestion. You rise, tucking the gift into your pouch. Your knees crack. The toad, wherever he is, disapproves. Back near the center of the garden, you pass another nun spreading powdered ash around a row of carrots. She sprinkles it like holy salt, eyes half closed. Ash for pests, she says, or maybe for memories. Depends who you ask. And so you keep walking, through a space that's never still, never silent, even when no one speaks, a place where even waste has worth. Where decay is revered, where the soil itself is patient, tender, a little moody, and always listening. You get it now. The nuns didn't just grow herbs, they grew faith in dirt form. They turned scraps into miracles. They made compost out of confessions and came back in spring to find forgiveness blooming in calendula and mint. And you're just beginning to trust the silence. Later that afternoon, the sky takes on a soft gold hue, the kind that makes even moss look magical. A few clouds drift overhead, slow and shapeless, like sheep with no deadlines. One of the sisters beckons you down a winding path of flat stones, leading to a part of the garden with no visible rows, no wooden markers, and oddly, no shadows. You step into a clearing surrounded by short hedges. There's a ring of smooth white stones on the ground, and just beyond that, a row of gooseberry shrubs, their spindly branches casting faint shadows that flicker with the breeze. A tall nun waits in the middle of the circle, holding a polished wooden staff in one hand and a moon chart in the other. She points upward, then downward, then to the horizon, her movements as measured as the tide. It dawns on you, this is the moon garden. While not all convents tracked lunar cycles, some, particularly those near water or in regions where superstition bled into faith, followed planting schedules based on the moon's phases. New moon, sow leafy greens. Full moon, focus on root vegetables. Waning moon, harvest time. Is there science in it? Maybe. Is there poetry in it? Definitely. You sit on a bench carved from old oak and watch as she aligns a sundial with a smooth stone embedded in the earth. She scratches something in a little book and then gestures to you with a soft, inviting wave. You join her beside a patch of soft soil. She places your hand on the ground and whispers, Now, the breeze stills, a cloud shifts, and you press a single calendula seed into the earth. That's it. That's the whole ritual. You wait for more. She nods once, turns, and walks away, slow and satisfied. Apparently, timing is everything. Calendula, by the way, was called Mary's gold in some convents, a flower said to open only with the sun, and sometimes believed to follow the Virgin's gaze. Of course, historians still argue whether it was grown for medicine, spiritual symbolism, or simply because it looked cheery against all the gray stone. Behind the calendula bed is a slightly more chaotic area, where cabbages lean dramatically and fennel stalks stretch like gossips trying to hear a distant scandal. You notice several geese waddling through, honking softly. No one stops them. In fact, a younger nun tosses them clippings like treats. Turns out, some of the nuns believed the behavior of animals could signal when it was time to plant or harvest. Geese moving north, time to sow garlic. Crows landing in threes, let the soil rest. One chicken standing on one leg near the yarrow patch. Maybe cancel your plans. You laugh under your breath. It sounds ridiculous. But you're also holding a fennel frond that smells like licorice and honesty. So who's to say? You stroll further, arriving at what looks like a sacred herb wheel. 4 quadrants, north, south, east, west, each filled with herbs said to align with elemental properties. Air, lavender and lemon balm. Earth, burdock and thyme. Water, mint and valerian. Fire, chili peppers and, oddly, mustard greens. A nun approaches, eyes bright, and silently offers you a sprig of mint. You accept it, crush it between your fingers, and inhale. Sharp, fresh, a little electric. She points to the water quadrant and mouths the word, dreams. Later, as you continue wandering, you find a weathered bench beneath a cherry tree, not quite in bloom. On the bench sits a book, handwritten, bound in goat leather, its edges curled from years of use. You glance around. No one in sight. You open it. Inside, diagrams of moons, planting schedules, and notations written in multiple hands. One margin reads, Sister Agnes says don't harvest during eclipse. Bad for beans. Another says, goose fell asleep on compost. Sign from God? You smile. You've stumbled upon the convent's moon journal, a blend of folk wisdom, lunar botany, and gentle rebellion. There's something so human about it. These weren't just spiritual women, they were observers, scientists, artists of the mundane. One page describes a night when several sisters swore the marjoram shimmered under the full moon. Like stars had fallen into the leaves, one wrote. Another entry simply reads, Lavender sang. Might have been wind. You gently close the book, place it back on the bench, and return to the path. The wind picks up slightly. You follow it, letting it carry you down a lane lined with night-blooming flowers. Jasmine, evening primrose, a few pale violas. Their fragrance is soft, but insistent, like a lullaby you forgot you knew. By the time you circle back to the main courtyard, the sky has deepened to that sleepy mid-afternoon blue. Somewhere nearby, someone is chanting, not loudly, just enough for the sound to fold into the breeze. You sit on the edge of a stone basin filled with clean water, watching petals drift across its surface. One falls, then another. And the garden breathes. You stay near the stone basin a little longer, letting the silence fill in all the little gaps in your thoughts. A breeze stirs the petals in the water, making them spin slowly like tiny boats in a dream. The sound of sandals against gravel grows louder behind you. Another nun, older this time with a small limp and kind eyes, waves you to follow her down a shaded passageway. You rise, stretching slightly. Your knees crack again. They've earned it. The path leads to a different part of the garden, quieter still and strangely hushed, even for a convent. There are no bells here. No bees. Just low stone walls, soft loamy earth, and rows of herbs growing with the kind of confidence that comes from centuries of being useful. She points to the path ahead, then to her lips, indicating this area is especially sacred. You nod and step inside. This is the infirmary garden. Everything planted here serves a singular purpose: healing. Not just soothing, not just seasoning, healing. The air smells sharper, richer somehow. Crushed mint, sun-warmed basil, the camphorous twist of valerian root. You recognize some of the herbs, others look like they belong in a spell book. She leads you to a wooden shelf under a lean-to roof. On it sit jars, some empty, some full of dried leaves, others steeping in liquid that catches the light like stained glass. She picks up one and lets you sniff. Chamomile, cloves, and something a little sour. Sleep tonic, she mouths. You approve? Behind the shelf is a simple bench, and above it hangs a large linen cloth painted with a human figure, arms out, palms up. Next to it, a grid of herbs labeled in Latin: mentha, calendula, salvia, valeriana. Lines are drawn from the herbs to parts of the body: mint for the stomach, calendula for the skin, sage for the throat, valerian for the mind. It's a medieval version of a wellness chart, equal parts medicine and art. You run your hand across the surface of the linen. It's soft and slightly waxy, preserved with beeswax and thyme. The face on the figure is left blank. For humility, the nun whispers. You ask with your eyes, did it work? She shrugs. You both smile. The two of you sit on the bench while another sister appears, carrying a small wooden box. She opens it slowly, revealing dried petals and curled leaves, neatly organized like jewelry. She points to a bundle of dried meadowsweet and traces her finger across her forehead. For pain, she says. And fevers. The three of you begin crushing herbs using a heavy stone mortar. The rhythm is slow, hypnotic. The scent rises, sharp, bitter, earthy. You feel the muscles in your shoulders begin to unwind as your hands find the groove. Press, twist, lift, press, twist, lift. It's like prayer for the hands. There's a bowl nearby filled with strips of clean linen. You realize they're making poultices, medicated cloths used to treat inflammation, aches, wounds. You help smear the crushed paste onto a warm strip and roll it up carefully, tucking it into a little basket marked with a piece of green yarn. It will go inside to the infirmary soon. The nun points behind you, where another sister is harvesting yarrow, its white blossoms bright against the dark soil. She's snipping them carefully, placing each stem into a basket as if it were fragile glass. Yarrow was used for everything from nosebleeds to battlefield wounds. They called it soldier's woundwort. Of course, none of these herbs were magic. Sometimes they helped, sometimes they didn't. Historians still debate how effective medieval medicine truly was, whether the plants healed or if it was the act of tending, the care itself, that made the difference. But you're here now, and you can feel the quiet purpose in every movement. Someone nearby starts humming again, this time a low, familiar melody. It rises gently over the rows of herbs, curling between the mint and elderflower like smoke. It's a lullaby, or a psalm, or both. The garden opens up a bit beyond the bench, revealing a narrow channel of water running between two stone troughs. Rainwater collection. You kneel to dip your fingers in. It's cold and clear, with a faint scent of rosemary. The nun tells you they wash the wounds with it, not just to clean, but to bless. Next to the water channel is a flat slab of stone used for drying herbs in the sun. It's warm now, and the surface is scattered with bundles of marjoram, thyme, and comfrey. You help turn them, using a woven paddle so the oils don't stick to your fingers. You never touch them after anger, one of the nuns says softly, only after stillness. You think about that for a moment. How often do we rush into things with hands still full of tension? How different would everything feel if we waited for stillness first? The sun is beginning to sink lower now. Shadows stretch longer across the stone paths, curling like ink in water. The herbs shift color slightly, their greens softening into blue-gray. You gather what's left of the dried comfrey and place it into a linen pouch, tying it with a thin strip of reed. Someone rings a tiny handbell. The day's tending is done. The infirmary beds are full of clean herbs. The chart on the wall now has fresh markings, and the mortar holds the faint stain of meadowsweet and mint. As you stand, one of the nuns hands you a fresh sprig of thyme. "For your dreams," she says. "You place it behind your ear, just for now." And you leave the healing garden, your steps slower, your breath deeper, and your mind a little lighter than before. You wander back through the main garden paths, still holding the sprig of thyme behind your ear like a child might hold a feather, part talisman, part joke, part secret gift. The sun's dipping toward the treetops now, and the light has taken on that golden softness that makes everything look briefly enchanted. Even the compost heap, somehow. But instead of heading indoors with the rest of the sisters, one gestures for you to follow her, this time through a narrow stone arch almost hidden beneath an ivy curtain. The archway leads to a secluded patch behind the main convent wall, and immediately the atmosphere changes. There's a different kind of quiet here. Not the hushed reverence of healing, not the busy silence of labor. This is the quiet of mystery. The pause before a question is asked. You step into a small open area with a sundial at its center, flanked by short stone pillars carved with symbols you don't recognize. Around the edges grow tall stalks of mugwort, wormwood, and sweet Sicily, plants associated with dreams, visions, and the stranger side of medieval spirituality. A nun, perhaps one of the elders, waits at the sundial, a bundle of moon charts and planting scrolls under her arm. She doesn't smile, but she does tilt her head slightly, acknowledging you as both guest and student. This is the ritual patch. A place where herbs weren't just medicine or food. They were celestial, astrological even. You walk slowly past rows of plants grouped not by color or height, but by zodiac sign. Virgo herbs over here, ruled by Mercury, dill, caraway, and fennel. Mars herbs, like nettle and basil, cluster together with a certain fierce defiance. The nun points to a cluster of blue flowering borage and traces a shape in the air. A star, maybe, or the symbol for Jupiter? She lays one of the scrolls on a flat rock and unrolls it. It's a chart, half lunar calendar, half horoscope, half garden diary. Yes, that's 3 halves. Medieval math was more poetic than precise. You spot notes in several hands like, "Don't prune rosemary under Scorpio," and Sister Magdalena swears time grows faster during Aries. You sit beside her as she points to today's date, then to a crescent shape drawn beside it. A waning moon. Good for rooting, she indicates, bad for confession. You both chuckle softly. There's a long-standing scholarly debate over how seriously medieval convents embraced astrological planting. Some dismiss it as folklore. Others see it as practical mysticism, especially in communities with limited access to academic medicine. But as you sit in this small circle surrounded by herbs matched to planets and temperaments, it feels less like superstition and more like a quiet attempt to understand the vastness of life, to participate in something bigger than your little plot of land. The nun passes you a small, delicate book. Its cover is worn but soft, stitched with faded thread. Inside are herbal personality charts. You flip through. Melancholic, mint, parsley, lettuce. Choleric, basil, marjoram, onion. Sanguine, sage, fennel, lavender. Phlegmatic, cabbage, lemon balm, poppy. You raise your eyebrows. She nods and gestures to your thyme sprig. Melancholic, she mouths with a wink. Apparently thyme is the herb of thinkers, dreamers, and those prone to over-analyzing goose behavior. You keep flipping. There are even notes on planetary bathing, when to soak in rosemary water under a full moon, how to scatter marigold petals for better memory, and one particularly strange suggestion involving goose grease and the constellation Leo. You try not to picture that one too vividly. You ask softly, "Did this really work?" She shrugs. "It calmed us," she says. That was enough. At the edge of the garden, a tiny sundial rests beside a patch of wild lettuce, carved into its base. As above, so below. As within, so without. You realize something important. These nuns weren't trying to control the world. They were trying to harmonize with it, to let the moon, the stars, the soil, and their own quiet intuition guide the timing of small things, planting, cutting, brewing, resting, a system not built on certainty, but on rhythm. On faith that the body, like the earth, knows when to open and when to wait. The nun reaches into a pouch and hands you a single fennel seed. She presses it into your palm like a coin. For clarity, she says. You hold it up to the fading light, then tuck it into your own pouch next to the crushed eggshell and mystery root from earlier. Your pocket smells increasingly like a salad bowl, but you don't mind. As you turn to go, you glance back at the celestial patch. The herbs sway gently in the breeze, and the sundial casts its long shadow across the Virgo section. A good day for root herbs. A bad day for starting arguments. You'll keep that in mind. The ivy curtain sways again as you step back through it, returning to the familiar garden paths, rows of thyme and basil, chamomile and sage. You pass a few sisters chatting softly now that the labor period has ended, and you catch snippets of conversation about dinner preparations, a missing basket, and whether the moon will rise early tonight. You smile. The world may be wide and wild, but here, in this little corner of history, someone has already made sense of it through plants and patience. You don't need to understand it all. You just need to let it grow. Evening is gently settling over the convent garden now, the kind of slow golden fade that makes you forget the hours ever passed. The sunlight washes the stones in amber. Bees have vanished. Shadows lengthen like stretched out yawns. You walk the gravel path alone for a while, letting your feet follow wherever the herbs guide. That's when you hear it. Whispers. Not the breeze, not the rustle of rosemary. Actual human voices, low and rhythmic, drifting from a narrow corridor between the basil beds and the beehives. You slip around a corner and find two nuns crouched beside a short stone wall, their heads bowed in close. At first, you assume they're praying. Then you notice the leaves in their laps. One holds a sprig of tansy. The other, a small root of mandrake wrapped in linen. They look up at you. One raises an eyebrow. The other smiles slightly. They wave you over. This isn't prayer. This is strategy. You sit beside them on a low bench carved with little crescent moons. The nuns begin pulling sprigs of various herbs from a satchel: wormwood, rue, hyssop, and mint. They arrange them in neat lines, sorting them into what looks like bundles: 3 for calming, 2 for clarity, 1 for what you suspect might be rebellion. Welcome to the stories behind the plants, the whispered ones. It turns out some abbesses weren't just healers, they were tacticians, and herbs weren't just remedies, they were tools. You listen closely as the sisters recall tales passed down from sister to sister, root to root. One story tells of an abbess in the 12th century who cured a local baron's son of mad humors using only lemon balm and vinegar, then used her growing popularity to secure funding for 3 more garden beds. Coincidence? Maybe. Another tale involves a cluster of calendula flowers planted in a suspiciously symmetrical circle around the convent bell tower, just days before a local bishop's unannounced visit. He arrived, smelled marigolds, and left praising the nuns' holiness, never realizing Sister Agnes had slipped valerian root into his tea beforehand. Historians still debate whether these small victories were real or just embellished over time. But you know how stories go. Truth and time dry out differently. One nun pulls out a tiny scroll from her pocket and unfurls it. Inside, in a delicate hand, is a list. For persuading superiors, angelica root, marjoram tea. For faking humility during inspections, dusty boots and dried sage pinned to sleeves. For uncomfortable meetings, clove water behind the ears. You nearly laugh out loud. This is herbal espionage, nun style. They let you hold the scroll for a moment. It's softer than it looks, slightly worn along the edges, as if it's been passed around too often to count. You recognize the scent, faintly lemony, with something sharper beneath. Probably from the last time someone spilled balm water on it. As the scroll rolls closed, one of the nuns plucks a flower from a nearby patch of borage. She presses it into your palm. "For courage," she says. The petals are blue, like a twilight sky. Borage was believed to embolden warriors. In some parts of Europe, it was floated in wine before battle. In this garden, it's brewed in tea before difficult conversations or long copying sessions in the scriptorium. You tuck the flower into your pouch, now brimming with the strange, fragrant souvenirs of your journey. Eggs and fennel, thyme and mystery root, courage and confusion, pressed in petal form. As the nuns gather their herbs into cloth bundles, one glances over her shoulder and gestures for you to look toward the chapel. There, beyond the slatted windows, candles begin to flicker. The evening psalms will begin soon. But not just yet. Before they rise, they add one last bundle to their satchel: basil, lemon verbena, and a pinch of dried mugwort. "For clarity of dreams," they whisper. "For seeing what needs to be seen." You nod, unsure whether you're more impressed by the science, the story, or the sheer swagger of it all. These weren't just women of faith. They were gardeners of strategy, farmers of subtle resistance. They knew how to keep their world orderly by letting a little chaos bloom under the leaves. You help them gather the last of their scrolls, fold them tightly, and tuck them into hollowed spaces in their cloaks, between layers of wool and linen, beside pins and buttons and ink-stained fingers. As you walk back with them to the central path, you notice how differently the garden looks now. Each bed a message, each herb a phrase, the whole space, one long, fragrant sentence written in green. You breathe it in. One of the sisters leans close and murmurs, "Remember, not every secret needs telling. Some are better grown." The moon begins its slow rise over the eastern wall, casting long shadows across the fennel. You glance back once more at the hidden corner where stories sprout beside seeds, and then you step back onto the worn gravel path that leads toward your next discovery. By the time you reach the western edge of the garden, dusk has begun to blur the outlines of everything. Hedges melt into hedgerows, sage looks like shadow, and even the pebbled path beneath your feet seems softer than before. A faint ringing sound draws your attention, not the bell tower, but something smaller, closer. You follow it to a wooden door, tucked between two squat stone buildings, just wide enough for a wheelbarrow to pass. A nun pushes it open for you with her elbow, her hands full of linen-wrapped bundles. She nods for you to enter, and you step into a narrow hallway, lined with hanging herbs, and the gentle smell of lavender, wood smoke, and honey. This is the infirmary. You're not sick, but you are welcome. The walls are smooth stone, softened with whitewashed plaster and simple tapestries embroidered with herbs. One depicts Saint Hildegard of Bingen, hands outstretched, surrounded by stylized plants, rose hips, angelica, even a few odd specimens that may have existed only in dreams. A faint warmth clings to everything in the room, like the memory of fire. A long table stretches across the far wall, its surface cluttered with bowls, pitchers, scraps of parchment, bundles of thread, and one very tired-looking candle. Several nuns work quietly here, their movements practiced and gentle. One gestures for you to join. You sit beside her, and she slides a bowl your way. Inside, crushed yarrow, rose petals, a little raw honey, and something minty. You stir gently, and the scent rises like a question. "Poultice for the old sister with the hip pain," the nun says softly. The process is almost musical. One grinds, one mixes, one folds the paste into clean linen. Each poultice is tied with a colored thread, yellow for pain, blue for fever, red for spiritual afflictions, whatever those might be. You glance at a nearby shelf stacked with jars, and your eye catches on one labeled in careful Latin, Syrupus rosae. Rose syrup, used for sore throats, bad dreams, and, according to a scrawled note tucked beneath the jar, emotional storms. You make a mental note to remember that one. As you help clean the table, one of the older nuns tells you, very softly, and possibly not entirely seriously, that the infirmary garden grows best when the patients sing to it. Humming, she clarifies, not full Gregorian chant. We're not that ambitious. She leads you out a side door, where another, smaller herb patch sits, tucked away, half hidden behind a low stone wall. This is the garden for the sick room. Herbs here are cut young, before their oils peak, easier on tender bodies. You kneel beside a row of lemon balm and begin trimming, careful to leave the inner stalks untouched. Lemon balm was prized for calming the nerves. Monks and nuns alike would brew it into teas for patients who couldn't sleep, couldn't stop crying, or who simply needed to remember what comfort felt like. You rub a leaf between your fingers and inhale deeply. Comfort smells like lemon balm and clean linen. The nun beside you gathers marigolds, placing them in a shallow basket lined with wool. For the skin, she explains, and the heart. There's a quiet moment as the sun slips behind the chapel, and everything takes on a pale silver-blue hue. You're aware of how still the world is. Even the geese have gone silent. A single moth flutters past, lands briefly on the edge of a feverfew plant, and then vanishes into shadow. Inside, the infirmary hums with new movement. A sister carries in a steaming pitcher. Another lights fresh candles with a taper pulled from a wax-stiff pouch. Someone is singing, very softly, in Latin. You don't recognize the words, but the melody is soothing, repetitive. Kind. You help lay bundles of fresh herbs on the windowsill to dry overnight. Chamomile, comfrey, a little valerian. They'll be crushed in the morning, mixed into salves or stirred into teas. You don't need to ask what each one is for. You've learned by now. The rhythm of care is its own language. One nun gestures for you to follow. She brings you to a smaller side room where a single bed sits by a narrow window. An elderly sister lies there, her eyes closed, breathing softly. On her pillow, a small pouch of herbs, lavender, thyme, and a dried orange peel. For dreams, for protection, and maybe for memory. You kneel beside the bed and rest your hand lightly on the wooden frame. The nun leans in and whispers, "She helped plant the first sage bed here, when she was younger than you." You look again at the frail form resting peacefully in the candlelight. The garden lives in her still, maybe always will. You return to the main room, your chest warm and heavy, in a way that's not sad exactly, just full. The nuns thank you with nods and gestures. One places a small strip of red-dyed linen in your hand. "You've tended now," she says. "That makes you one of us." You smile and tuck the cloth beside your growing collection of sacred oddities, the fennel seed, the pressed borage flower, the egg-crushed compost charm. You've helped plant, harvest, crush, and soothe. And tonight, you'll sleep like someone who's been healed just by touching the work of healers. As you step back into the garden, night has fully settled. A single lantern swings gently from the porch beam, casting halos of warm light on the gravel below. You breathe in lavender, sage, rosemary, memory. You walk slowly now, not because you're tired, though you are, but because the garden won't let you rush. It's quiet in that very particular way. Only ancient places are quiet, not empty, but full of watching. Past the rosemary hedge and the gently bubbling water basin, You find yourself facing an old wooden gate with a crescent-shaped latch. One of the younger sisters gestures to open it, then follows you through with a sly grin and a bundle of fresh sage tucked under her arm. She leads you down a narrow footpath toward a cluster of low-growing herbs. The scent is earthy, grounding, familiar. As you kneel, you spot something curious. Tiny wooden stakes, arranged like miniature shields at the head of each plant bed, painted with animals, a lion, a goose, a rather proud-looking goat, and one lopsided rabbit. You look up, confused, and she leans in and whispers, "The monks started it." That explains a lot. Apparently this patch is part of an unspoken, long-standing rivalry between the convent and the neighboring monastery, not over doctrine or theology, but over herbs. Yes, herbs. Who can grow the most potent rue? Whose calendula blooms earlier? Whose comfrey makes a better salve? And, critically, who has the stronger bees? You hear the story unfold slowly, in between weeding and harvesting. Decades ago, a monk boasted his ginger root cured a merchant's gout in 3 days. The sisters countered with a thyme infusion that helped the merchant sleep again. One-upmanship ensued. Quiet, stubborn, and very polite, but fierce. Now they exchange gifts annually. The monastery sends bundles of dried lemon peel for your weak teas, and the convent replies with clove sachets to help them smell their own overgrown garlic. It's all very cordial and extremely passive-aggressive. You spot a small table set with drying trays, covered in various herbs with attached parchment tags. One reads, "Marjoram, 2 days faster than Brother Thomas. Do not touch." Another, "Monk's mint, accidentally ours now." Historians might not record these details in scholarly journals, but the garden keeps its own kind of history, stitched into soil and sass. The younger sister hands you a basket, and together you begin harvesting chervil. She explains in hushed tones that the monks claim they invented a chervil and fennel soup that banished melancholy. The nuns say their version added angelica and restored the soul itself. You ask who's right. She shrugs. Ours tastes better. You move on to a patch of lemon thyme, where a curious border has been laid. Smooth white stones on one side, reddish-brown bricks on the other. You point. She smiles. That's the dividing line, their time, our time. You laugh. Apparently, during planting season, the monks and nuns both use this garden border to measure sunlight. They've been accidentally adjusting each other's markers for years. At the edge of the patch, a wooden bench is carved with the Latin phrase, "In herbis veritas," in herbs, truth. Someone scratched below it in rougher script, "Et competitio," and competition. You sit on the bench and she joins you. You both sip water from a shared flask, flavored faintly with mint and cucumber. The breeze picks up. A cloud drifts across the moon. You can hear the distant sound of a lute from the monastery. Someone is playing a slow, slightly off-key tune. She rolls her eyes. "Show-offs," she mutters. But her smile says she's fond of them. You watch her reach into a pouch and pull out a little notebook. She flips through pages of careful sketches, herbs, bees, even one labeled Brother Sebastian, in a tangle with our rose vines. The drawing's not flattering, but it's very detailed. You laugh together softly. The garden knows humor. It's all part of the medicine. You help gather the last of the thyme, tying it into neat bundles with twine dyed using beetroot from the convent's own vegetable plot. The dye stains your fingertips pink, and she points to your hands. "Now you're official," she whispers. On your way back to the main path, you pass a small wooden sign staked into the soil. Herb count to date. Convent, 39 types. Monastery, 36 types. Please water before bragging. You wonder how many visitors walk past this corner of the garden and never realize a cold war of calendula has been quietly unfolding for centuries. As you re-enter the central garden, the sister gives you a playful nudge and slips a sprig of victory mint into your pocket. Just in case the monks visit tomorrow, she winks. You breathe it in. It smells like spice, joy, and a little bit of triumph. The garden at night is dim now, lit only by 2 low lanterns swinging from wrought iron poles. Shadows ripple along the hedges, and the scent of sage and wood smoke lingers on the air. You walk slowly, pockets full of herbs and laughter. Not all wars leave wounds. Some leave bouquets. By now, the stars are poking through the darkening sky like shy children at the edge of a party. You tilt your head back, trying to spot familiar constellations, but the garden has grown so quiet and still that even the heavens seem reluctant to interrupt. A cool breeze rustles the taller plants, and somewhere nearby, a door creaks open. Candlelight spills from a narrow window in the chapel. You notice a flicker of movement through a cloister archway and follow your curiosity toward one of the older wings of the convent. The stones here are older, rounder at the edges, worn smooth by centuries of sandals and prayers. A sister with ink-stained fingertips is stepping quietly through a narrow passage, a heavy book tucked under one arm. She nods at you and gestures inside. You follow her into a small scriptorium, barely a room really. Just a desk, a stool, and a wall lined with shelves holding old manuscripts, tightly rolled scrolls, and what appear to be hymnals. But as she unrolls one, you realize they're not just songs. Between the elegant bars of musical notation and Latin lyrics, someone has scribbled herbal recipes. You lean in. The margins of a choral piece to St. Bridget contain instructions for brewing cough syrup, using horehound and honey. A psalm dedicated to the Virgin Mary is interrupted mid-line by a tiny note. Add 3 drops of vinegar to comfrey poultice. Sister Clare insists it works. It's not defacement, it's devotion. The music was holy, but so was healing. And paper was precious. When you had one good page, you used it for everything. The nun beside you opens a different scroll, this one full of plant drawings. Some are labeled, others aren't. One sketch shows a curious leaf with 7 points and a thick stem. It's labeled Nostrum Ignoramus. We don't know this one. You grin. At least they were honest. She flips to the back of the scroll and hands it to you. There, in the tightest, smallest script yet, is a recipe written diagonally across the page's corner. To calm the spirit in times of sorrow. 1 measure lemon balm, ½ measure lavender, 3 leaves each of borage and mint, steep until night takes root. You copy it down on a scrap of parchment she offers. Your handwriting is messier, but it'll do. She smiles and adds, Sister Amélie's cure for winter grief. Then she taps the side of her nose. Secret. You continue exploring, your fingers brushing the spines of books that hum with history. 1 volume contains a long list of herbs categorized not by effect, but by sound. Rustlers, clinkers, breathies, silence. Sage, for instance, was a mumbler. Rosemary, talkative. Lavender, whisperer. You tilt your head. And now that you think of it, maybe they were right. The shelves hold jars of dried petals, bits of beeswax, and little sachets tied with red string. On one, you spot writing that reads, For voices lost in illness. Steep in warm wine, pray, Wait. Some jars contain no labels at all, just little pieces of dried root, faded flower heads, or crumbled leaves. Their purpose may be forgotten, but their presence is not. They sit on the shelves like quiet ancestors, still offering comfort in their own way. The nun opens a cupboard below the desk and brings out a worn book, its pages softened with time and use. This one is different, bound in dark leather, with a single dried violet pressed between two pages. She shows you carefully, and you recognize the script. It's the convent's herbarium. Not just a list of plants, but a journal. Each entry includes where the plant grew, what time of year it was harvested, who tended it, and what it was used for. You see names from decades past: Sister Miriam, Sister Edith, Sister Agnes, many Sister Agneses. One entry reads, "Yarrow harvested in the East Patch during Sister Clare's vigil. Used in 3 poultices and 2 teas. The rest burned during a thunderstorm." The nun gestures for you to turn a few more pages. You do. Then you see something strange. A pressed leaf, deep green, glossy, veined like a river map, glued beside a set of lyrics. The melody is familiar, though you can't place it. Beneath the musical notes, "Sing while brewing, twice at boiling, once at rest." You can't help it. You hum the tune softly under your breath. The nun closes her eyes and nods. They said the water listens. Whether it's true or not, the room feels warmer for the attempt. She replaces the book on its shelf and turns to you with a sly expression. From a drawer beneath the desk, she produces a single scroll, tied with a green ribbon and sealed with wax in the shape of a tiny ivy leaf. She places it in your hands. You look at her, surprised. "For me?" She shrugs. "For the road." "Or the next garden?" You nod and tuck it away. Your pouch is getting full, but there's always room for a gift of silence and green wisdom. You leave the scriptorium in soft candlelight, the faint scent of dried lavender clinging to your sleeves. Outside, the garden waits, hushed now in anticipation of stars. Somewhere, a violet has bloomed in moonlight, and the plants still listen. You step lightly back into the garden, scroll in hand, as the evening air settles cool and clean on your skin. The convent is quieter now, with most sisters inside for evening prayer or simple rest, but a few lanterns remain lit along the paths, casting soft amber pools of light that flicker with every breeze. You follow a trail of petals, literally. Small violet blossoms have been carefully placed every few steps, forming a gentle curve toward the oldest part of the garden, tucked against a crumbling stone wall draped in ivy. You pause at a worn archway marked with a carving of an open hand cradling a plant. Simple, unmistakable. The healing hand. The gateway to the secret patch. A quiet rustle draws your gaze downward. A ginger cat appears from beneath a sage bush, tail high, eyes like molten gold. It stares at you, then turns and trots forward as if it expected you to follow. And really, what choice do you have? The cat leads you into a crescent-shaped corner of the garden, hidden behind overgrown lavender. It's shadier here, cooler, the soil darker, and the plants taller, lusher. The light doesn't quite reach this spot, and yet everything thrives. You kneel to examine a row of oddly shaped leaves with a bluish tint and a sharp, bitter scent. A sign, half faded, reads, "Herba vetita," forbidden herb. The cat flops beside a rosemary bush and yawns, utterly unbothered. One of the elder nuns appears silently beside you. She doesn't startle you. Somehow, you expected her. She places a finger to her lips, then points to a cluster of plants, tucked beneath a lattice of sticks and cloth. These herbs aren't labeled. You recognize a few: wild rue, black hellebore, perhaps a patch of datura, its pale flowers curled like trumpet bells. They shimmer faintly in the moonlight, beautiful and deeply strange. "These," she whispers, "are not for everyone." She gestures to a small stone bench, and you sit beside her. Between you lies a mortar and pestle, already dusted with something chalky and sweet-smelling. She begins grinding slowly, methodically, and then tips in a few crushed petals of belladonna, not to ingest. Never to ingest. "These are studied," she says, "respected. Not feared, but never presumed." You nod. There's power here, but not just in the plants, in the restraint, in the way the nuns choose knowledge over temptation, discipline over show. She tells you, softly, that some herbs in this patch were inherited from apothecaries long gone, others from women who passed through the convent on pilgrimage, leaving seeds wrapped in scraps of embroidered cloth. One came from a Moorish trader, smuggled inside a pouch of saffron. Another from a Breton woman who claimed she could speak with birds. Did the plants work? Did they heal or harm? Sometimes both, the nun admits. Sometimes neither. Historians still argue whether convent gardens were places of wisdom or suspicion, sanctuaries or secrets. But sitting here, in the cool, fragrant dark beside a sister who grinds mysterious herbs by moonlight with a cat curled around her foot, you understand it's more complicated than that. It's faith and fear, hope and humility, trial and error. She opens a small wooden box beside her and shows you 3 sachets, one tied with black thread, one green, one white. "Black for pain," she says. "Green for rest, white for peace." She lets you choose one. You reach for the green. She nods approvingly and tucks it into your satchel, pressing her palm gently over yours. "For dreams," she says, "but also for waking." You sit together for a long while, the mortar now resting, the cat now snoring. Crickets chirp lazily, and somewhere far off, the chapel bell gives a single chime, almost as if to remind you that time still exists. Eventually she stands, and you follow her out of the patch. At the threshold she turns, whispers a blessing over the herbs behind you, and then pulls the curtain of lavender back into place, hiding the entrance from sight. Just before she goes, she looks over her shoulder and says, "Some things grow better in the shadows." And then she's gone. You're alone again, or almost. The cat reappears, tail high, rubbing against your legs before disappearing into the rosemary. You smile and glance down at your pouch, which now holds the green sachet, filled with something you may never fully understand, but which already makes you feel strangely safe. You sit on a low stone wall and breathe in the scent of wild rue and cooling soil. This garden has layers, places you see first, places you're shown, and places you earn by patience. Tonight, you found one of the deeper places. Not every visitor does. You run your fingers over the edge of your scroll, the pressed borage, the fennel seed, and now the soft sachet meant for dreams. A small wind shifts the rosemary nearby, and something tells you you're not quite done yet. You rise from the low wall, brushing dried thyme leaves from your robe, and let your feet guide you away from the shadowed herb patch. The path ahead is smoother here, the stones flatter, the scent of the air lighter, lavender, mint, and just a hint of something sweet and strange. You follow the sound of water, the familiar trickle of a nearby fountain. But when you reach it, you find not the central courtyard basin, but a small, circular stone pool fed by a narrow pipe of aged copper. Moonlight glints off the surface like a mirror stretched thin. Beside it sits a clay mug, already steaming. You glance around, no one in sight. You pick up the mug and bring it to your nose. The aroma is like nothing else in the garden, part lemon balm, part fennel, part something floral and faintly spicy. A tea, clearly. But not just any tea. You take a sip, and it tastes like floating. Not sweetness, not bitterness. Just lift. It dances across your tongue like a note half sung and then vanishes, leaving behind the echo of some herb you can't quite name. It's the kind of thing you imagine drinking just before stepping into a dream. A gentle breeze rolls through, and across the pool's surface, a single white petal drifts. You watch it float, bobbing with a strange rhythm. Then, from the corner of your eye, you see one of the nuns appear. Silent, barefoot, walking with the easy calm of someone who knows the garden in her sleep. She smiles, kneels beside you, and points to the tea. "Float leaf," she says softly. "It only grows once a year." You glance down at the mug, suddenly aware that this might be a rare honor. "Is it real?" you ask. She shrugs. "We think so." The sisters call it float leaf, though no such plant exists in modern records. Some suspect it was a rare cultivar of valerian or skullcap. Others say it was a freak hybrid that sprouted in a particularly blessed patch after a summer storm. Whatever the truth, the garden protects its secret. She dips a hand into the pool and draws up a single round leaf, pale and translucent. It shimmers slightly. She lets it rest in her palm and then places it gently into your pouch, beside the sachet and scroll. "For when the path is too heavy," she whispers. You ask if it's medicinal or spiritual. She just says, "Yes." The two of you sit by the fountain for a while. She hums quietly. No words, just a low tune that sounds like wind over water. You sip the tea slowly, feeling its warmth settle not in your stomach, but somewhere higher, like it's rearranging your thoughts, one by one, and telling them to calm down. Eventually, she begins to speak again, slowly, thoughtfully, as if translating the garden's language into something human. She tells you the sisters didn't always understand the power of their herbs. Some they learned by accident, others by pattern. "When we gave Sister Amelie lemon balm," she says, her hands stopped trembling. That was enough. She tells you about a night many years ago when a terrible fever swept through the village beyond the convent. The monastery sent prayers. The convent sent tea. She tells you they buried some of their herbs at the foot of the oldest oak after a particularly hard winter, not as a ritual, but as a way of mourning. "What we couldn't save," she says, "we fed to the earth." You sit quietly for a while after that. She rises first, brushing dust from her robe. Before she leaves, she reaches into her own pouch and removes a tiny vial sealed with wax. She presses it into your hand. "For flight," she says with a wink. You stare after her as she disappears between rows of basil and moonflower. Her footsteps so soft they barely count. You study the vial. The liquid inside is clear with a hint of gold, like honey touched by lightning. You don't open it. Not yet. Some things should be saved for when the stars forget your name. As you tuck the vial into your pouch, you realize how full it has become. Not just with herbs, but with meaning. With stories, moments, mysteries that never made it into books or scrolls. This garden holds knowledge that doesn't need recording. It just needs remembering. You turn back to the fountain and watch the last few ripples fade. Float leaf. You may never see it again. Or perhaps, if you're lucky, you'll see it exactly when you need it most. You rise and step back into the path. The stones feel smoother beneath your feet, the wind warmer against your skin. You're not floating, but you're close. The garden has changed again, not in layout or shape, but in mood, deeper, slower, as though it's exhaling. You walk past familiar beds, chamomile now tucked in for the night, sage whispering to itself in the wind, thyme curling inward under moonlight. The air is softer, the light more silvery than gold. You pause near the vegetable patch, not the most glamorous part of the garden, but possibly the most loved. A sister is bent over a row of beet plants, her habit tucked up slightly at the knees, her bare hands working the soil with surprising tenderness. She doesn't look up, but she gestures for you to join her. You do, kneeling beside the neat little rows of dark, leafy greens. She pulls up a beet, brushing off the soil. It's bulbous, dirt-freckled, and oddly majestic. "Blessed be the beet," she mutters, and you try not to laugh. But she's serious. Beets were once considered suspicious, not just food, but medicine, sometimes even magic. In medieval Europe, some believed they improved love, vision, even the soul's anchoring in the body. Others warned they could darken the blood and stir dangerous dreams. "Too red," one monk had written in an old ledger. "Untrustworthy." The nun beside you chuckles, as if she's heard that line too. She hands you a beet of your own. It's warm from the day's sun, the skin tight and smooth. You rub the surface with your thumb, and it bleeds red into your palm like a smear of ancient ink. "You learn everything through vegetables," she says. "Patience, balance, forgiveness." You ask about forgiveness. She pauses, weighing her answer like a scale in her palm. "You harvest what you tend," she says, "even if it grows crooked." She points to a row of crooked beets nearby, each one twisted slightly, leaning, looping back on itself. "Still good," she shrugs. "Still sweet." You help her collect the harvest, placing each beet carefully into a woven basket lined with wool. The wool is there to keep the roots from bruising. Softness protects firmness. There's a lesson in that too. As you work, she tells you that certain vegetables were chosen not just for sustenance, but for symbolism. Beets for groundedness, leeks for resilience, turnips for transformation. Carrots for... Well, carrots were just easy, she laughs. She leads you to a low shelf beside the path. Nothing fancy, just a few clay pots, a rusted spade, and a notebook bound with string. Inside are sketches of root systems. Not the pretty tops. No, these are cross-sections of what lies beneath. Beets spiraling like curled fists. Carrots tapering toward mystery. Onions layered like secrets. You sit with the book a moment, fingers trailing over the lines. So much of this garden's wisdom lives underground. The nun places a steaming cup beside you. "Beet broth," she says. You brace yourself, but it's good. Earthy, sweet, with a hint of mint and vinegar. "For blood," she says, "and balance." You sip slowly, the warmth spreading through your chest, your belly, your hands. You suddenly remember the first time you saw a garden as a child. The smell of rain on new soil. The joy of pulling something edible from the ground and being allowed, encouraged, to eat it. A beet tastes like memory, doesn't it? She tells you about a sister who once tried to make beet ink. It worked, she says. Mostly, until the ants came. You laugh. What happened to the ink? We turned it into soup. Fair enough. You help her plant a few final rows, seeds pressed gently into shallow furrows, covered with a whisper of earth. She sprinkles a pinch of ash over the top. For blessing. and snails. The stars are out in full now. A pale fog clings to the edges of the convent wall, blurring stone into sky. You both sit for a while longer, staring at the neat rows of vegetables like they're prayers waiting for answers. She reaches into her robe and pulls out a small parchment-wrapped bundle. Inside is a single dried beet slice, curled and darkened to the color of wine. "Carry it," she says. "For grounding or snacking. You take it, of course." She smiles, and without a word, returns to the rows, quiet, barefoot, the picture of devotion with dirt under her nails and a beet in her hand. You rise, tucking the dried beet into your pouch. It crunches gently beside the sachet, the float leaf, and your many other treasures. You're starting to wonder if you'll ever be able to explain any of this to anyone. You're also starting not to care. Some gardens speak in vegetables, some in dreams. And this one speaks in both. You leave the vegetable beds behind and follow a gentle curve in the path that leads toward the orchard, where the trees sway slightly under the weight of the season. Their branches cast long, flickering shadows on the ground, like fingers weaving invisible spells across the grass. You pass beneath an arch of tangled honeysuckle, its fragrance soft and nostalgic, and enter a clearing dotted with flat stones, moss, and wooden posts marked with faint symbols. You found the garden's astrology corner, where herbs meet the stars, and sisters quietly chart their own destinies between the roots of sage and the glow of Saturn. A young nun is seated on a low bench, her knees drawn up beneath her robe, a wax tablet balanced across her lap. She's sketching something with a stick of charcoal, an herbal chart, it seems, divided into 4 quadrants: melancholic, choleric, sanguine, and phlegmatic. The 4 temperaments of medieval medicine. Part personality test, part health profile, part divine guesswork. She glances up and waves you over, brushing aside a small bundle of parsley with ink-stained fingertips. "Which one are you?" she asks. You shrug. She starts reading off the traits. Melancholic, quiet, reflective, probably drinks too much lavender tea. Choleric, fiery, focused, likely to argue with a goose. Sanguine, cheerful, charming, prone to forgetting their cloak. Phlegmatic, calm, slow-moving, may fall asleep in compost pile. You laugh. "I think I'm 2 of those." She nods. "Most of us are." She hands you a feather quill and gestures to a blank space in the chart. "Pick your herb," you think, then draw a little stalk of parsley. It feels right. Steady, a little bitter, but surprisingly bright. Parsley, she tells you, was once thought to bring balance to the humors. Some believed it sharpened the wit. Others claimed it only grew where innocent blood had been spilled, which feels dramatic for a salad garnish. But this is the Middle Ages. She adds your drawing to the larger chart and grins. You're part of the garden now. Around you, clusters of plants grow in rough groups based on temperament. The sanguine patch is wild and joyful. Fennel, basil, violets, bouncing with bees. The melancholic section is quieter. Rosemary, sage, and the ever-gloomy endive, slumped in its bed like a poet mid-existential crisis. The phlegmatic corner is damp and sleepy, full of mints, lettuces, and soft moss. The choleric quadrant practically glows with energy. Garlic, mustard greens, rocket, and one defiant chili plant that seems to glare at you. The nun explains that the sisters don't really believe your entire nature can be reduced to a leaf and a mood. But mapping yourself to an herb makes things simpler, more tender. If you know you're mostly rosemary with a hint of fennel, you can forgive your restlessness and flavor your life accordingly. She leads you past the temperamental beds to a circular stone slab, etched with planetary symbols. Each stone around it bears a plant name: moonwort, sunrose, Mercury thyme. You step onto the center slab, and for a brief moment, the stars above feel like they're aligning just for you. "Stand still," she says. You freeze. She walks slowly around the circle, then places a sprig of lemon verbena in your hand. Sun-ruled, she decides, but probably with a little lunar chaos. You tuck the sprig behind your ear, next to the fading thyme. Above you, stars blink slowly awake. The moon has fully risen now, bright and round, casting soft silver light across the entire garden. It catches in the leaves, glimmers on the water basins, glows against the stone walls like a candle held close to parchment. The nun invites you to sit again. She offers a scrap of parchment, this one filled with doodles and scribbled notes. "I draw dreams," she says. You study the page. One sketch shows a woman walking through rows of lavender while stars fall from the sky. Another shows a beetroot with a crown. A third, a cat napping on a sundial. You point. "That one's real." She nods solemnly. "Yes, most of them are." You laugh again, a soft, slow laugh that feels earned. She hands you the sketch of the crowned beet and whispers, "For your scroll." You roll it carefully and tuck it away. Soon, the candle on the bench gutter flames and flickers out. The nun rises, wraps her shawl tighter around her shoulders and says, "We never really sleep alone. The herbs are always listening." Then she's gone, vanishing down the starlit path between fennel and feverfew. You remain seated a little longer. Above you, constellations crawl across the night sky, slow and indifferent. Below you, roots twitch gently, invisible in their movements, but alive nonetheless. You press your hand to the earth, fingers splayed across the moss, and you swear. You feel it pulse. You rise slowly from the mossy circle, your palm still tingling from where it touched the ground. Whether it was real or imagined doesn't seem to matter now. The garden has a pulse of its own, and you've started to move in time with it. As you make your way toward the southern slope of the grounds, the sound of low humming floats toward you. It's not chanting, not quite a song. More like a work rhythm, steady and slow, as if someone is gently coaxing bees with a lullaby. You follow the sound past a hedge of chamomile until the path opens up to reveal a curious sight. A group of nuns in veiled hoods, clustered around tall wooden hives. Smoke drifts lazily from a metal pot, and one sister waves it gently at the entrance of a hive. The bees, seemingly soothed, buzz softly. Not alarmed, just busy. This is the convent's apiary. One of the sisters waves you over, her hands sticky with honey and ash. She points to a short stool and motions for you to sit. Then she lifts the corner of her veil slightly, revealing a face flushed from heat and joy. She whispers, "They're in a good mood tonight." You're relieved to hear that. She lifts the lid of one hive slowly and shows you the honeycomb, golden, dripping, perfectly formed. The scent is rich and wild, like blooming thyme and late summer warmth. She snaps off a small corner and hands it to you on a piece of waxed parchment. You take a bite. It tastes of rosemary and lemon, of sage and something floral, maybe the lavender hedge, maybe the dreams of bees. Medieval convents took their honey seriously, not just for food, but for medicine. It was stirred into teas, slathered on wounds, used in poultices, and even in early versions of what we'd now call throat lozenges. Sweetness was rare, precious, and earned. But the bees didn't always make it easy. The sister points to a chalkboard nearby that tracks the hives by name. You read, St. Bridget, Old Glory, Lucia the Loud, and one simply marked, regret. You ask. She shrugs. It stung 4 of us in one day. We respect her. Apparently, the convent has had its share of beekeeping mishaps. One year, a swarm escaped during evening prayer and congregated on the chapel door like a velvet cloak. Another year, the bees swarmed the compost pile and refused to leave until the sisters performed a honey blessing involving Gregorian chanting and parsley crowns. She swears it worked. Historians still argue whether medieval nuns truly believed bees had personalities or spiritual inclinations. But as you watch this sister gently stroke the top of a hive while whispering, "Good girls, steady now," you suspect they knew more about reverence than science anyway. She teaches you how to hold a frame of comb, steady, balanced, with slow breath. You feel the gentle vibration of bee life just beneath the wax. It's not threatening, it's humming. Alive. Ancient. When she lifts another lid, a small puff of smoke rises, and the bees retreat calmly, as if they understand it's not an attack, just a polite, "Excuse me." She scoops a small wooden spoon into a jar and lets the honey drip into a ceramic dish. You notice herbs floating in the amber liquid, dried rose petals, thyme blossoms, even a sliver of ginger root. "This is blessing honey," she says, "given to the sick, the sad, the newly arrived." She hands you a vial sealed with wax. "You've earned it," she says. You smile and slide it into your pouch, where it nestles beside the float leaf and the sachet. The pouch is beginning to feel like a chapter of the garden itself, a story you carry leaf by leaf. The bees continue their soft work, undisturbed by your presence. One lands on your sleeve and crawls up to your shoulder. You stay still, and eventually it takes off again, buzzing toward the orchard. As you stand to leave, the sister gives you a linen cloth wrapped around a honeycomb chip and murmurs, "For mornings you forget the garden." You thank her quietly, then take one last look at the glowing hives. The path back is lit now with tiny lanterns, just enough to see your way, not enough to disturb the night. The plants rustle softly as you pass. Somewhere nearby, a dove coos. The bees have gone still. But the hum remains. A pulse, a breath, a sweetness that lingers even after the sting. The lanterns along the path sway gently in the breeze, their light dim enough to invite sleep, but warm enough to guide your feet without faltering. The garden has entered its most peaceful state, what the sisters call the listening hour. Not quite night, not quite day's end. A time when plants seem to lean inward, and the stones remember every footstep laid upon them. You walk softly now, led by instinct more than direction. The soil underfoot is dry and cool, crumbling slightly beneath your sandals. The garden is no longer something you're walking through. It's something you're part of. And then you find them. 3 sisters sit on low stools in a circle, surrounded by bundles of herbs arranged like an audience around them. They're not working, not praying, just sitting. One is rubbing a bit of thyme between her fingers. Another has her eyes closed. The third is watching you. She pats the stool beside her. You join them, settling in with the ease of someone who's finally found the place they didn't know they were looking for. No one speaks. Instead, one of the nuns picks up a small bundle of dried rosemary and lays it beside her knee. Another does the same with lemon verbena. The third with wild chamomile. A 4th bundle lies in the center. You realize this is something ritual, something old. One of the nuns begins humming, not a melody exactly, more like a sustained note. The others join her, each adding a different tone, and together the sound becomes layered, woven, full. You close your eyes. The vibration moves through you, not loud, not forceful, just present, like standing inside a beehive without fear, or placing your ear to the earth and hearing what's growing underneath. You open your eyes, and one of the sisters gestures to the center bundle. You reach out, fingers brushing dried petals and a few curls of bark. The scent rises like memory. Lavender mostly, but something deeper too, like cedar, like parchment, like nights you didn't realize were sacred. This is the listening bundle, they explain, used during silent prayer, when words fail and only the senses remain. Each herb in it was chosen not for its medical properties, but for its voice. Some plants speak when we cannot, one of them murmurs. They take turns explaining, not in full sentences, but in little phrases that hover like steam. Rosemary for grief, verbena for the questions, chamomile when you don't even know why you're sad, cedar to remember who you are. They say each herb listens in its own way. Some are good at holding stories, others are better at forgetting them. You smile at that. You've needed both kinds. One of the sisters places the bundle in your lap, and you cradle it like a book you've read before, but only now understand. They encourage you to speak, not out loud, but into the bundle. Whatever rests heavy on your heart, whatever you've carried with you that won't quite settle, you don't need to say it. You just need to offer it. So you do. You hold the herbs close. Let your thoughts rise and drift. And when you exhale, you imagine them being caught in the dry curls of lavender and thyme, softened, stored, transformed. Then, gently, you set the bundle back into the center of the circle. One of the nuns lays her palm over it and whispers a blessing, not in Latin, not in English, just something soft and ancient that hums beneath language. The others do the same. You all sit together in silence again. You realize now, this garden doesn't just grow medicine. It holds pain, absorbs it. Compost isn't just waste, it's what comes after letting go. Even sorrow has a season. And tonight, it rests beside the rosemary. Eventually, one by one, the nuns rise. They bow their heads to the bundle and disappear down different paths. You stay a moment longer. The listening hour is ending. But something has shifted in you, unknotted, eased. You rise, tuck a single rosemary sprig into your pouch, and begin walking once more. Lighter this time, like you've handed off something that didn't belong to you anymore. The stars are brighter now, sharper against the ink-black sky. Even the silence sparkles. You pass the thyme bed again, the fennel patch, the wild rue. Each one feels like an old friend, and somewhere in the lavender, the breeze carries a whisper that sounds like, "We heard you." Your feet follow a worn stone path lit only by the stars and the occasional flicker of lantern light. The garden no longer feels like a place outside you. It feels like a story you're still walking through. Each breath tastes of sage and something older, deeper, like wind blowing through a memory you forgot you had. You turn a corner, led more by scent than sight, and find yourself in a narrow corridor between high hedges. The air is sharp here, peppery. You inhale again. Parsley, and more than that, something sweet, something sneaky. You walk forward, and the hedges part to reveal a curious scene. A small wooden table tipped slightly, with a broken crate of scattered herbs and 3 distinct footprints in the soft dirt. None of them made by sandals. You squint into the darkness, and then you see him. A man, barefoot and lanky, crouched low over a sprig of stolen mint, whispering to it like it might whisper back. A small sack slung over his shoulder rustles as he shifts. He doesn't look threatening, just hungry. And perhaps a bit embarrassed. You've just stumbled onto the garden's secret visitors. One of the sisters arrives a moment later, stepping through the hedge without hurry. She sees the man and stops. He sees her and freezes. There's a pause, a tension like a tight string. Then she sighs, not annoyed, not angry. Just practiced. She reaches into her sleeve and pulls out a small cloth bundle. "You again," she says quietly, and tosses the bundle onto the table. He catches it, wide-eyed. He opens it to reveal a handful of dried parsley, a strip of lemon peel, and a hard biscuit. "Thank you," he whispers. "Don't trample the feverfew," she replies. And just like that, he nods, bows, and vanishes into the hedge. You're not sure where he goes, but you're sure he'll be back. The sister turns to you and shrugs. "Pilgrims, poets, poor souls, they find us eventually." She tells you that every convent garden eventually becomes known, not just for its beauty or healing herbs, but for its generosity. And so people come, strangers, wanderers, sometimes desperate, sometimes just curious, and sometimes to steal the parsley. But the nuns never call it stealing. "We plant enough," she says. "Some is meant to go." You walk with her down the narrow path, passing hidden alcoves lined with thyme and lemon balm. She points out small footprints in the soil, some human, some not. "Foxes love the catnip," she murmurs. "And cats? They patrol at night. Especially near the fig tree. One of them bit a bishop once, by accident." You both pause near a low wall where a row of basil has been trampled slightly. The sister bends, inspects the damage, and pulls out a length of broken twine. "Someone took the good stalks," she mutters. "Left the weak ones." Typical. But she's not angry. She's smiling. You notice now that many of the beds near the garden's edge are loosely tended. Less symmetrical, less labeled. "Why?" you ask. She chuckles. "Because those are for the ones who never knock. And they come," she says, "in all forms. A child from the village who heard thyme helps with fear. An old woman with aching knees. A merchant looking for something to mix into his wine before a long trip. One night," she tells you, "a man left a coin carved from bone beneath the rosemary." "Still don't know what it meant," she adds, "but the rosemary grew taller after that." You step into a corner where a few flat stones have been arranged into a kind of shrine. No sign. No candle, just herbs, laid out with care, parsley, rue, a few bits of bread. "Offerings," she explains. "Or thank yous, sometimes both." She points to a small wooden box nailed into the wall. You open it. Inside, scraps of paper, messages. You read one. "To the sister who gave me mint that night, I slept without fear. Thank you." Another. "Your tea made my daughter laugh again." Another still. "I stole your onions. I'm sorry. They were perfect." You smile. The box is full of apologies and poems and confessions. A garden mailbox for people with no address. The sister shrugs. They leave more than they take. You sit on a low stone near the box, and she hands you a blank scrap of parchment and a charcoal stub. "Write something," she says. You hesitate. Then you do. You write simply, "I came here tired. I am not tired now." You fold it and place it into the box. She pats your shoulder once, then slips away down a side path, humming a lullaby you don't recognize, but wish you did. You sit there for a while longer. The air smells like mint and parsley. Soft and sharp. A balance. And somewhere in the hedges, Someone else is quietly arriving, hoping for a handful of thyme or a warm word wrapped in rosemary. The garden is ready. You stand, stretching gently, and take one last look at the wooden message box. The lid creaks as it shuts, soft, final, respectful. It's not locked. It never is. Trust is the latch here. With your steps slower now, more deliberate, you follow the curve of a cobbled path that leads you past the ivy-covered chapel wall and into a gently sloping area you haven't seen before. The scent hits you first. Rose hips, lavender stems, and something vaguely citrus. This is the drying garden. Rows of raised racks and strings hang between wooden posts, with herbs in every stage of withering, some curled into themselves like sleeping mice, others brittle and feather-light, swaying gently in the night breeze. The scent is astonishing, sweet, earthy, pungent, and strangely nostalgic. A sister waits beside a long table, hands busy folding linen sachets filled with dried petals. She gestures for you to join her. You do, and the moment you sit, she places a scroll in front of you. Thick parchment tied with twine, the edges stained with something pale pink. You untie it. It's not scripture. It's a shipping list. The convent sends these sachets and scrolls far beyond their stone walls, across the sea to Italy, up the coast to Ireland, even into Icelandic monasteries where the winters are too long and too grey. We send what will still smell like sunlight by the time it gets there, she says. You help her sort bundles into rows. Rose hips and elderflower for the melancholy monks in the north. Thyme and oregano for a convent with a notoriously bad cook. And a special parcel of lemon verbena and crushed mint for Sister Benedicta, who once mistook ash for flour. There's laughter here, but also care. Every sachet is labeled by hand. Every scroll includes notes not just on what to use, but when. Steep this during thunder. Burn this on feast days. Don't mix with too much sorrow. One box is marked, "To the sisters who do not speak." Inside, a cloth bundle of violets and crushed apple peel, stitched into the shape of a closed mouth. You ask if the scrolls always go to places of faith. The sister shakes her head. Sometimes to widows. Or to midwives. Once to a grieving bishop who wrote back. She shows you his note. "I never believed plants could cry. Until now." You carefully pack more scrolls and bundles. Some are sealed with wax in the shape of herbs. A rose, a beet leaf, a basil sprig. Each one a message, a quiet blessing. A prayer wrapped in linen. Nearby, 2 younger nuns are drying bundles of lavender, flipping them every few hours to keep their shape. One shows you how to gently twist the stalks into a braid and hang it upside down to dry evenly. "This helps the smell linger longer," she says. "So the peace does too." You help wind one bundle, careful not to snap the stems. It's fiddly work, but satisfying. Your hands start to find their rhythm again. Like prayer, but quieter. Next, you move to the scroll station. Another sister hands you a short piece of parchment and a feather quill, already dipped in ink. "Write one," she says. "What kind, you ask?" "Something for someone you'll never meet." You think for a while, then write, "The days are long, but the mint remembers your name." She reads it, nods, and tucks it into a bundle tied with golden thread. "That one's going to Wales," she says, "to an old monastery that smells of wet stone and rain." You grin. Seems like mint would feel right at home. You notice a wall behind the tables where pressed petals are being glued into a pattern. Circular, intricate, a kind of mandala made entirely of dried herbs. Each ring has a name. Not of plants, of people. Sisters who passed, the nun explains. "Did they grow these herbs?" No, but they whispered to them. You take a dried calendula petal and gently place it into an empty spot on the outer ring. No one asks who it's for. It's enough that you placed it. As the crates fill and the night deepens, the sisters begin to hum again, low, tuneless, but warm. The air smells like peace and goodbyes, like endings that still offer something. You finish tying the last scroll and press your hand to the lid of a wooden box, soon to be carried far away. And you wonder how far a garden scent can travel. How far a prayer can drift when pressed between thyme and verbena. How much of this quiet love might find someone years from now and still feel warm. You rise. Your knees crack. The lavender rustles goodbye, and you move on. You find yourself walking back toward the main garden paths, but before you reach them, a slow, echoing chime sounds from the chapel tower, low and deliberate, like a reminder that even in silence, there is structure. It's the call for the nightly inspection, when the bishop himself comes to visit. Yes, that bishop. The nuns warned you earlier. Once a year, the regional bishop visits the convent to ensure everything is, as he once put it, appropriately sacred and moderately tidy. You were told not to worry. They always pass. Barely, and sometimes with style. You wander toward the chapel, where a soft lantern glow spills onto the herb beds closest to the cloister walk. The sisters move quietly and efficiently, snipping stray leaves, tucking away questionable bundles, and straightening up anything that might look too experimental. One nun mutters as she smooths the path near the wormwood patch. Last time he asked if this was decorative cabbage. Nearly fainted when I told him it banishes spirits. You stifle a laugh. They're not hiding anything dangerous, but they are hiding the sass. You follow a cluster of nuns to the front of the garden where a long vine-covered pergola arches over a central walkway. This is the formal presentation space. The well-behaved lavender grows here, the symmetrical sage, the saintly chamomile. Nothing crooked, nothing strange. At least not visibly. A tall figure in a heavy cloak appears near the gate. He's flanked by two assistants, both with quills and parchment in hand, ready to judge the holiest oregano. The bishop steps forward. He sniffs. You swear the lemon balm wilts slightly under the pressure. He nods at the first bed, rosemary, standing proud like a small army. He asks, "And this?" A sister replies, "For memory, your grace, also for meat." He squints, jots something down. He moves to the thyme bed. "Ah, yes," he murmurs. Very obedient. What that means, no one knows. Then he spots something he doesn't like. A small, creeping vine has strayed beyond its bed. The bishop bends, frowns, and plucks it between gloved fingers. What is this? Before anyone can speak, Sister Maris steps forward and says without missing a beat, "Hope." He pauses, stares at the sprig, then at her. She does not blink. He returns the vine to the soil and clears his throat. Very well. There is a stifled cough, possibly a laugh. You walk beside the procession as they move toward the compost corner. One of the bishop's assistants makes a note, slightly pungent. The bishop pokes a gloved finger toward a steaming heap and asks, "Do you bless this?" Sister Beatrix answers, "Every Tuesday." His expression flickers, just enough to suggest he's not sure whether she's serious. You're not sure either. Then, finally, he reaches the drying racks. He inspects the sachets, reads a few scrolls. He even opens one of the shipment crates and lifts a satchel to his nose. He inhales, pauses, inhales again. He does not smile, but he does nod. Quite balanced. That's as high a compliment as he gives. Until, of course, he notices the cat. The ginger one. It saunters across the path, carrying a dead vole and trailing mint leaves in its wake. It pauses directly in front of the bishop, drops the vole at his feet, and then curls up beside a pile of sage as if nothing has happened. The bishop freezes. Sister Agnes whispers, "He likes to participate." The bishop clears his throat again, brushes imaginary dust from his sleeves, and declares, "The inspection is complete. Your convent remains in blessed order." There's an audible exhale among the sisters, and then he adds, almost reluctantly, "The herbs are thriving. A bit, perhaps too much." With that he nods curtly, turns, and exits down the path, his assistants scribbling behind him like furious mice. One of them trips over a lavender root. No one helps him. Once the gate closes, the garden erupts, not loudly, but with soft laughter, shared glances, and gentle applause for Sister Maris's line about hope. The cat stretches and wanders back toward the wormwood bed, like a monarch who's dismissed the court. You find yourself smiling, not just because the garden passed its inspection, but because the garden never needed to. It was always sacred, not for the bishops or the scrolls or the formal symmetry, but for the laughter tucked into the parsley, the sass behind the sage, the quiet courage of a nun who looks a bishop in the eye and calls a weed hope. You walk through the lantern-lit garden with a new sense of reverence, not for perfection, but for authenticity, for green things that grow sideways, for weeds that heal, for the parts of the garden that are never listed in anyone's report, but still feed the soul. The laughter fades into the distance, leaving behind a hush even softer than before. The inspection is over, and the nuns have dispersed into their nighttime routines, some to prayer, some to tea, some to the small comfort of quiet corners and well-earned rest. You drift past the pergola once more, its vines now heavy with dew, and follow a gently curving path lined with boxwood hedges. A lantern glows in the distance, hanging low over a stone table tucked between two elder trees. A single sister sits there alone, scribbling in a leather-bound notebook. She looks up and gestures for you to join her, patting the bench beside her with an ink-stained hand. You sit, laid out before her, a pressed flower journal, open to a page marked Uncatalogued Flora. Between the parchment folds lies a single pale blossom, wide-petaled, with a star-shaped center pressed so carefully that it still holds a hint of scent. Something citrusy, something familiar. "This," she says quietly, "is our discovery." She tells you the story in a hushed voice. How, many years ago, a young nun tending the southern hedgerows noticed a flower she'd never seen before. Small, humble, but persistent. It grew where nothing else did, between stone cracks on the outer wall, in the shade. She drew it in the margins of her notebook, described its properties, and gave it a name, Sanctiflora humilis, Holy Flower of Humility. The garden didn't have a name for it until she gave it one. And then, quietly, it began to spread, only slightly, only in corners. It never appeared in books, never in official reports, just in this garden, and only here. The sister hands you the pressed blossom. "You can keep it," she says. She would have liked that. You cradle the paper like a relic. "Who was she?" you ask. "Sister Cora," she replies. "The quiet one, the one who always left before dawn." There's a pause. Then she adds, "She named 6 herbs before anyone noticed she was brilliant. Historians don't know her. The world never wrote her down. But this garden remembers." You ask if there are other hidden names here, other sisters who named, recorded, taught, healed without leaving a single mark in the official texts. She smiles. All of them. The herb garden, she says, isn't just plants. It's memory. Memory that grows back every spring, that dries gently every fall. A memory written not with ink, but with rosemary and rain. You flip through the notebook with her, scanning the pages. One entry reads, "Discovered near Goose Coop. Smells like basil, but cries when picked." Another, "Possible crossbreed. Lavender plus unknown. Caused brief dizziness and small visions of St. Agnes." Yet another, "Leaves look like wings, taste like pepper. Sister Amelie swears it whispered her name." You're not sure what's real, what's metaphor, and what's wishful thinking. And honestly, it doesn't matter. She pulls a quill from behind her ear and slides a blank page toward you. "Your turn," she says. You hesitate, then draw something simple. A single sprig of thyme with tiny leaves and a curve like a question mark. You label it Thymus lucida, the forgetting kind. Smells of clarity. Tastes like relief. Best used when past and present blend. She reads it, nods. "It's in the garden now," she says. You sit together in silence for a while. A breeze stirs the petals drying nearby. A few fireflies blink in the bushes. The pressed flower glows faintly under the lantern light. Before you leave, she slips a second paper into your pouch, folded in quarters, sealed with lavender wax. "For later," she says. "You don't open it, not yet." You follow the path back toward the cloister, your steps soft and slow. You glance up once more at the stars, wondering how many things go unnamed each day. How many quiet women shape the world with their hands, their gardens, their notebooks, and disappear from the record. But not from the earth. You brush your fingers across a thyme bush as you pass. It feels like something that remembers. You walk slowly now, back through the sleeping beds of sage and calendula, past the tidy rows of parsley that rustle faintly like soft-spoken sisters, gossiping in their dreams. The night is fully settled. The stars are vivid above, scattered across the sky like pinholes in velvet. Somewhere, a bell gives a single chime. Not to summon, just to mark. Time's still moving. Even here. The path leads you toward a small gated corner of the garden. Low stone walls covered in rose hips, their fruit dark red and bulbous, like lanterns in miniature. A wooden sign swings gently overhead. No words. Just a carved droplet. Maybe water, maybe oil, maybe something more. You push open the gate. Inside, 3 sisters move silently between rows of terracotta jugs and glass bottles, each filled with syrup, oil, or some gleaming amber liquid that catches the lantern light like caught sunlight. You've found the preservation garden. It's where the harvest becomes time-proof, where summer becomes salve, where petals are turned into syrup and leaves into tonic. Where nothing good is wasted, not even the rain. One nun hands you a small copper ladle and leads you to a table where jars of rosehip syrup are being carefully sealed with beeswax. You dip the ladle in and take a sip. It's tart, sweet, earthy, like the memory of a summer morning. They tell you it's rich in healing properties, but that's not the point. It was made with care, with ritual, with sunlight and patience and rainwater caught in bowls shaped like lilies. You help seal one jar, pressing the wax down gently until it cools. The other sisters are packing bundles of dried petals into scroll cases, slipping in curls of bark and tiny scrolls labeled for the hard months. One of them turns and hands you a soft linen pouch. Inside, a spoon, a strip of thyme, and a tiny scroll reading, "Boil during snowfall. Sip when the sky feels too quiet." You place it carefully in your pouch. They teach you how to bottle rosemary oil, how to steep lemon balm into tinctures, how to dry petals on parchment by moonlight. It's not just preservation. It's preparation. For winter, for illness, for sorrow. One sister gestures to a row of tiny ceramic bottles near the edge of the wall. "Rainwater," she says. "From specific days." You blink. "Specific?" She nods. "The day we laughed so hard we spilled the oregano. The day of the lightning strike. The day Sister Judith made peace with the geese." You laugh, but she doesn't. "We bottle the water," she explains, "because some days are sacred." You sit with her beside the row of jars, each labeled not with dates, but with moments. One simply says, "The afternoon she remembered her own name." Another, "The day the basil came back." Another still, "When we wept without reason, and it rained for us." You ask if they ever use the water. "Sometimes," she says, "in teas. The hour is very late now, so late it has become early. The air has that stillness that only arrives just before dawn, when even the insects quiet down and the wind becomes less like movement and more like breath. The stars hang low and heavy, and the moon is beginning its long descent behind the eastern chapel wall." Your feet, dusty and tired, find a familiar path winding toward the oldest section of the garden. You arrive at the wormwood beds again. They're tall now, or maybe they've always been tall. You just notice it more now under moonlight. Their silvery leaves seem to shimmer faintly, as if remembering something, and near them 2 nuns kneel, heads bowed, not in prayer but in conversation, not with each other. With the plants, you crouch nearby, careful not to disturb. One of the sisters places her palm flat against the earth beside the wormwood, then leans close and whispers something. You don't catch the words. The other hums a low, single note. You remain still. After a moment they stand, and one walks toward you. She hands you a small linen cloth folded into a square. Inside, a pressed wormwood leaf, and a piece of old parchment with a single line written in delicate script. "The plant will speak when the silence is ready." You nod, though you are not entirely sure what that means. You don't need to. Some wisdom isn't meant for the ears, it's meant for the skin, the breath, the dreams. The sisters walk the perimeter now, slowly touching leaves and stems, whispering or humming, as if doing a final check before sleep. Not to correct, not to command, but to acknowledge. This is the garden's final ritual of the day, the whispers. You join them, placing your hand lightly on a rosemary bush that seems to lean just a little closer than before. You don't speak aloud. You don't need to. Somehow it hears you. You move quietly, touching each plant not with pressure, but presence. The lemon balm is warm. The feverfew damp with dew. The borage brushes your wrist with a softness that almost startles you. At the far edge of the garden, beside a row of foxglove, an old stone bench sits beneath a weeping ash. One sister gestures for you to sit. She holds a wooden box in her lap, its lid engraved with a spiral made of leaves. She opens it slowly. Inside, slips of parchment, each one thin, worn, and hand-rolled like scrolls the size of your finger. "These are the garden's legends," she says. You reach in and choose one. Unrolling it carefully, you read, "Once, a woman came here with no name. She left with rosemary in her pocket and never forgot who she was again." You look up. She nods. "That one's true." You pick another. "One sister grew parsley so wild it climbed the cloister walls. She said it was chasing the stars." You laugh gently, the sound swallowed up by the leaves around you. The sister rolls up the scrolls and places them back in the box, then hands you a final slip, blank. "Write your legend," she says. You hesitate. Then write, "Someone came here lost in noise. The thyme showed her how to listen. You slide the scroll into the box where it joins the others, quiet as breath. A slow breeze sighs through the garden now. The first hint of dawn is touching the edge of the sky. Barely there, just a faint silver smudge behind the silhouette of the chapel spire. The sisters begin to hum again, soft, low, like the sound roots might make if they had voices. One sister steps forward, holding a small bundle wrapped in green cloth. She places it in your hands. Inside, a pressed violet, a slip of bark with the word return etched into it, and 3 seeds. She doesn't tell you what they are. You don't ask. Some things grow better in mystery. As she steps back, you realize this part of the garden, the whispering corner, is not about harvesting or healing. It's about remembering, and maybe about being remembered. You stand now, the bundle in one hand, the pouch on your hip full of scrolls, herbs, stories, and breath. You look at the garden one more time, now lit by moonlight and memory. The leaves move, even without wind, and you swear. The thyme whispers your name. The sky is no longer black. It has shifted into that barely blue pre-dawn hue, the color of breath held just before a word. The stars are dissolving, quietly making room for the light. A few of the bolder birds begin to stir. One offers a single hesitant chirp as if testing the acoustics of the garden before fully committing. You step lightly now. Not because the path is uneven, but because it feels like walking through a sacred breath. Everything is holding still. Everything is about to begin again. The garden, for all its age, is preparing for another new day. You return to the courtyard, where steam curls from the kettle hanging over the garden hearth. One sister stands beside it, already awake, already pouring. She sees you, says nothing, but gestures to the second mug beside her. You sit across from her on a wooden bench, still damp with dew. She places the mug in your hands. It's warm, comforting. Smells of lemon verbena and mint with something deeper, perhaps chamomile or perhaps thyme itself. Neither of you speaks for a long moment. Then she says softly, "The day is a garden too." You nod. She continues. You plant actions, thoughts, meals, mistakes, conversations. They grow while you're not looking. They climb walls and tangle around the people you love. You sip. The tea is perfect, the kind that settles in the chest and unfurls like a yawn. The garden teaches us how to live, she says, folding her hands around her own cup. Tend gently, prune without cruelty. Let go when it's time. The chapel bell rings once. This chime is different, thinner, quieter. A bell for waking, not for working. A nudge, not a call. The sisters begin to stir around you, emerging one by one from the cloisters and dormitories, hands clasped, eyes still fogged with sleep. Some stretch. Others carry baskets. One yawns and drops a sprig of rosemary from her sleeve. You remain seated. You feel as if the night has folded something into your soul, something herb-scented and bright. Not knowledge, not exactly, but a way of being, a way of growing. A sister kneels beside a patch of morning blooming crocus, touches the petals lightly, then smiles to herself. Another walks the paths with a small broom, gently sweeping away yesterday's footprints. The air is rich with dew now. Each blade of grass gleams like it's been dipped in crystal. Bees begin to blink awake and test their wings. You finish your tea and rise. Your satchel is heavy with offerings. Inside, scrolls, a sachet, a spoon, a borage flower, a pressed violet, float leaf, rosehip syrup, a slip of bark that says return, and seeds, still nameless. You feel no need to label them. Your hands are stained with soil and thyme oil. Your breath smells faintly of honey and mint. Your mind is quieter than it's been in a long time. One of the sisters calls out gently, "Do you know the way out?" You smile. Yes. And also, no, but you walk the path anyway. As you pass the gates, the garden remains behind you. Yet somehow, also within you, The scent of sage clings to your sleeve. A petal, unnoticed, rests in the fold of your robe. Just before you cross the threshold, you turn back once more and see the nuns tending, walking, brewing, whispering, 1,000 tiny acts of devotion. Not dramatic, not loud, but enough to change a world. You step into the pale morning light. It smells like lavender and wood smoke, and just like that, the garden lets you go. Let your breath slow now. You're no longer walking. You're no longer weeding or sipping or placing pressed petals into the pages of books. You are still. The garden is behind you, but its rhythm still echoes in the soft beat of your pulse. Inhale gently. You can still feel the smooth stone under your hand, the rustle of rosemary at your fingertips, the faint tingle of mint on your tongue. The sisters have gone to their prayers, their rest, their soft tasks beneath the morning sun, but their care lingers, like perfume caught in old linen. Exhale slowly. Let the thyme hush your thoughts. Let the float leaf keep your dreams buoyant. Let the pressed violet warm the space behind your heart. You're not alone. You carry the garden with you now, in your breath, in your hands, in the quiet places where stories root and memory grows. The seeds tucked in your pouch may never touch soil, but they've already bloomed somewhere inside you. One more breath. In and out. There is peace in the pattern of small things, steam rising, petals falling, footsteps echoing on worn stone paths. You walked through it all, you listened, you tended. You were tended to, and now you rest. The day will wait. The earth turns gently, the herbs are listening, you are home.